So, some key insights on banks. The key function of banks is money creation, not intermediation. And if you tell that to a mainstream economist, that's already provocative, but it is 100% correct. Okay? What banks do, and I was a banker at Barclays Bank for 5 years, I made loans. I know exactly what the entries are that you need to create when you make a loan. You create a new loan on the asset side of the balance sheet, and when you do that, you create a new deposit of exactly the same amount that is credited to the guy who has just borrowed from you. Okay? So this is the only time I'm going to use this little board here. When the bank makes a loan, its balance sheet is like this. When it creates a loan, it creates an additional loan entry here, and the customer, let's call him X, that's the customer X, and it creates an additional deposit entry here, change in deposits, delta D. It's also in the name of X. The bank, at that moment, creates new money out of thin air, and I will go into more detail about that now. Now, how about intermediation? A common definition of intermediation is that the banks, or the banking system as a whole, and it's important to make that distinction, accepts non-bank deposits of savings, somebody's savings, and then lends those savings out to somebody else who needs them. Okay? Under this definition, banks are not intermediaries. They never, ever do that. Okay? Because what they do is this. And this is not intermediation because this guy, X, is the same. So in terms of causation, the critical issue here is that loans come before deposits. Loans create deposits, and not vice versa. What the intermediation story misses completely is the monetary nature of financing. So let's go into more detail now. What story would I have to tell the intermediation story? Well, let's have a scenario where A wants to buy goods or assets, doesn't matter, and B wants to sell goods. Now B dumps the goods at the bank, and a deposit is recorded. And then the bank gives the goods to A, and a loan is recorded. That story is, of course, complete nonsense, because that never happens, right? But that's how you have to argue if you say that banks intermediate funds, intermediate savings from some guy to some other guy, because that implies that deposits come before loans. What you have to ignore for this is, of course, if somebody comes into Bank A and brings in a check that's drawn on Bank B. That's a micro-phenomenon. That doesn't change the overall amount of loans and deposits in the economy. It just reshuffles them between different banks. That's not relevant for this argument. And cash deposits are also not relevant. First of all, cash is a tiny item in terms of the overall bank business. And banks never lend out cash directly. You only draw out cash against an existing deposit. So the intermediation story is a completely impossible story, yet it dominates in today's debate. It is also known as the loanable funds story. The money creation story, we start with the exact same scenario. A wants to buy goods, B wants to sell goods. Now, A goes to the bank to get financing, and B stays at home. He has nothing at all to do with this. Okay? A gets a new loan of $1 million and a new deposit of $1 million. What the bank has done here is to create its own funds, deposits, in the act of lending. It has not had to wait for anybody to deposit something first in order to make the loan. It created its own funding. That's, of course, an absolutely extraordinary privilege that's not enjoyed by any other kind of business. Then what happens is that A uses this new deposit to pay B to get the goods or the asset. So then it looks like intermediation has happened, because then it's going to be somebody else here on the liability side of the balance sheet. But the bank at that point does nothing active. The bank just provides check clearing services so that people can exchange the money that has been created among themselves for their business needs. The actual purposeful activity of the bank has been the creation of new money. And of course, it can also destroy money. This story happens every single time a bank makes a loan. And it is completely different from the loanable fund story. The implications is that new loans involve no intermediation, no funds are being withdrawn from previous users as savings. And that means, and that is absolutely critical, and for Irving Fisher it was front and center, is that banks can easily start a lending boom. Because if they can do this, they can simply grow their balance sheets by expanding the money supply, the broad money supply, that is, of course, not the narrow money supply. Okay? They do not have to attract deposits of pre-existing money.